Welcome to The Third Space, the podcast for those who see the beauty of Catholicism as well as the ugliness, who've experienced real harm and real grace in the Church. I'm your host, Paul Fahey, a mental health counselor and catechist. In every episode, I will have conversations with guests about the good and the bad in the Church, avoiding easy answers or black and white fundamentalism in order to hold on to all that is true. And today I'm talking with Anne Carpenter about Hans Urs von Balthasar and the Catholic Rite. Anne is a professor in the Department of Theological Studies at St. Louis University. She's the author of Theo-Poetics, Hans Urs von Balthasar and the Risk of Art and Being from University of Notre Dame Press, and Nothing Gained is Eternal, A Theology of Tradition from Fortress Press. Anne, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me. Back in January, you published an article in Commonweal titled Raising the Bastions, Why the American Right Turned Against Balthasar. And when I first read it, I found myself basically cheering by the end of it. I've read it at least 2 or 3 times since. And I thought in the article you did a really fantastic job naming some of the, like getting at some of the core things that I have been observing, not just within like American conservative Catholicism, but also within some of the ways that I've seen the institutional church respond to abuse, and kind of circle the wagons in self-protection rather than choose vulnerability. So I was super excited. I reached out to who I didn't know was a mutual friend, but to Sean Blanchard, and I was like, "Hey, have you read this? This is fantastic." And he's like, "Yes, Anne is wonderful." And so then he encouraged me to reach out to you and have you on the podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks very much for reading my essay, for having me. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Before we jump into the content of the article,
Mhm.
we just met. I'd love to hear some of your story. I kind of make this joke with a lot of my guests, but I imagine you didn't grow up like wanting to be in the position that you're in. Like most people don't grow up being like, I want to be a professor of theology. Um, so
No.
yeah, what's your story? How did you end up being a professional Catholic theologian?
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up I grew up Catholic and I grew up really interested in Catholicism. I had a lot of questions, which my parents encouraged. Um, and so I got really into theology relatively young. Um, So I can remember reading it in high school, and yeah, I eventually became a theology major. In undergraduate, I went to the Franciscan University of Steubenville. Studied theology there. Went to Marquette for my master's and my PhD, and I think I kept going because they let me. Uh, I found it very interesting. I would say I went into theology for the wrong reasons because I wanted to win debates
Yeah.
with my classmates. Sounds like the goals of a 16-year-old. But particularly when I ran into the church fathers, I ran into a much different kind of theologizing and a much more enormous, like, cosmic, wonderful way of thinking about God. And I wanted to keep doing that. I wanted to think about God as mystery. Um, and yeah, and they kept letting me. Um, so yeah, got my PhD from Marquette. I worked at St. Mary's College of California for 10 years. And then SLU picked me up to St. Louis University. Sorry.
Yeah.
uh, picked me up to work with them. So I'm at SLU now.
Yeah. Um, your article is about or includes a lot of um, von Balthasar's theology. Um, for listeners who don't know, uh, who is Hans Urs von Balthasar? And uh, I get the impression from this article that he is someone who is important for you, and I'm curious, yeah, why you resonate with his work.
Yeah, yeah. So Hans Urs von Balthasar is a Swiss theologian, Swiss Catholic theologian in the 20th century. A lot of his closest friends were all members of what's sometimes called ressourcement theology. So Henri de Lubac taught him, at least unofficially.
Yep.
Um, yeah, he was friends with Joseph Pieper. Um, he knew Jean Danielou, all of them. They were all very influential on the Second Vatican Council. Balthasar was always around them and among them, and also kind of doing his own thing. Because he got his PhD in literature and not in theology. He got basically master's degrees in theology and philosophy. So he yeah, he does patristic work like they all do, and then also wrote this trilogy, which is enormous. It's not 3 books. So yeah, he was kind of, what do I want to say? He didn't start off his career that important or influential. He ended his career very important to a lot of Catholics in the Anglophone world and a lot of Anglicans actually. Um, so he sort of became famous near the end. He's maybe most famous for writing about beauty, theology and beauty. Um, yeah, 'cause he
Yeah,
was, he was an art nerd. He was a musician, played the piano. Yeah.
I think I first heard of him about maybe 10 years ago or so, man, maybe even longer than that, when Bishop Robert Barron was then Father Robert Barron,
Hmm.
and he would write and talk about Balthasar's work on hopeful universalism,
Mm.
and he would get in some public discussions about that. I think that was the first time I ever came across Balthasar's work.
Yeah,
Um,
Balthazar's interesting. He's like, depending on who you talk to, he's the bulwark of orthodoxy for Catholicism, or he's a dangerous heretic. I didn't know this when I first ran into him. I ran into him in undergraduate, and I didn't really know any of that. So people have a lot of strong feelings about
yeah,
Balthazar and Balthazar's work.
what attracted you to him?
I think, well, he cited the church fathers that I really loved, but he asked new questions, and he seemed to ask questions that he didn't know the answers to ahead of time. He was experimental in the ways he tried to answer those questions, and that was really, really exciting for me. He wasn't um, simply drawing together the wealth of what the church has already done or remembered, but was asking very serious questions about how to think in a Catholic way in the world today. And yeah, I think what thrilled me was both the familiarity of his use of the fathers, the way he sought them out as friends, and then the way he would dare new things and revise what he thought, or throw in poets, make these references to like Haydn and stuff, other like musicians, orchestras. And that was very, very interesting to me. It was thrilling because it was a kind of adventure. And I think I just sort of stuck with him for that. I was thrilled to learn to do that with him. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, your article, you've titled again, Raising the Bastions, or the American Catholic Right Turned Against Balthasar. Um, what's your article about? And why did you write it? And why did you write it now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, um, as I mentioned, people have always had strong reactions to Balthasar, which I've encountered a lot in my professional life because I do work on him. He's my main guy, and so people have felt very empowered to share their takes, their Balthasar takes, to me, and they no one feels kind of just lukewarm. And so I think I started off years ago just curious about why people felt so strongly about Balthasar. Um, and they really needed to make sense of him as a hero or an enemy, which does a kind of violence to his work. Um, yeah. So
Yeah,
in my professional sort of nerd life as a scholar, I'm usually trying to give a more subtle sense of what Balthazar's up to, and that he's complex and has this larger historical context he comes from that helps to make sense of him.
yeah, that seems similar to you had talked about how uh in high school being really drawn to like apologetics and winning arguments and like seeing things in right or wrong, black or white, and then being much more captured by mystery and nuance. Uh, I'm kind of hearing that here too, like wanting to push back against reading Balthazar as he's on my team or he's on the other team, but rather trying to see more of the mystery and the nuance.
Yeah, yeah. In some sense, just put him back in history as someone who tried to serve a church. So maybe we should think about what's useful in him that can serve the church. Um, yeah, um, yeah. I mean, so the essay itself. So I come from the American Catholic Rite. It's my people. They're the ones. They're the reason why I encountered Balthasar so young. Because I went to Franciscan, and in more than one theology class, we read his work, and I was fascinated. And I was really, I wanted to be a good and faithful Catholic. That was a really, and still is, a big concern of mine. And so yeah, that was the language of my early education, and in a very serious way, I wouldn't be where I am now without the American Catholic Rite. 'Cause the Catholic left doesn't like Balthasar pretty much at all. Sometimes they'll give him some credit, but it's very it's a kind of divided world, at least with respect to Balthasar. Um, which Balthasar himself wasn't always, helpful about. So, but anyway, it's it it's been interesting having myself owed so much to people, maybe not directly all the people I mentioned in my essay, because I don't know any of them very well, but that universe is very much mine, and I love it, um, very, very sincerely. And at the same time, all these people that I was taught to love asked us to be brave and to be smart, to be intelligent, to ask every question that genuinely arises. The theology can take it, the church can do that. That was their thing. And they suffered for it. They genuinely suffered to make that possible. Balthasar, Anne Bach, etc. Um, and so I'm very concerned to watch Balthasar in particular, but others too, become an excuse to avoid questions, to be afraid, um, to fail to think hard,
Oh,
and to call it good, to call it wonderful that we're doing that.
yeah. You you wrote in the second paragraph of your article, Balthasar can help us understand the ongoing practical and spiritual crisis within the Catholic Rite. It is the crisis of proclaiming Christ crucified while peddling domination. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think many on the Catholic Rite are pleased that so much of Catholicism is in a very unusually powerful position in America. It's in the vice presidency, it's on the Supreme Court, late, late night comedy is very Catholic. And they want America to do the good, which is very good and important. But I think they want to force Americans to do the good, um, regardless of whether people even understand what we ask of them. Um, yeah,
Say more about that. I mean, my mind immediately goes to something like you have integralism, something
yeah,
of like a wedding of church and state in a way where spiritual authority can be used with state authority um, and uh, imposed on the populace. Is that what you mean, or do
yeah.
you mean something
I
more
mean,
nuanced than that?
yeah. There are a bunch of different groups. It's to encompass them all will make me sound hopelessly vague. Uh, and then to be too specific will sort of not really include other groups. The American Catholic Rite is a bunch of different people who actually all want different things and not all the same things. They agree that um, liberalism, American liberalism, Enlightenment liberalism, so classical liberalism, and Catholic liberalism, which can basically mean those same things, but sometimes something else. That those are all bad for human beings and bad for the church. Um, that's sort of what holds them together, although they want very different things from the future. I think so. Yeah, some of them want Catholics to be in charge of the state very directly, and they want a Catholic nation state very sincerely. Others want something less direct. But basically, uh, to make sure that American laws fit Catholic law on some level. Um, so, yeah.
It's so it man, there's so many things like coming in my mind right now, and maybe I'll just like popcorn a whole bunch of things. So a month or two ago at the most recent Sikh conference, the president of Catholic Vote gave a talk, and in that talk, she said, um, "I'm going to quote." Um, in the context of talking about Catholic political and cultural influence, she
Hmm.
said, if Catholics aren't at the table, they're on the menu. And this deeply resonated with a comment that I read about, well, it was just a few weeks after January 6th, 2021,
Hmm.
um, and all the events at the Capitol. And a friend of mine had posted in a kind of like lament about all of the Christian symbols that were at this violent event and the way that Christianity was being co-opted for ideological violence. And in the public comment, a professor at Catholic professor at Catholic University said, I will not apologize for my support of the Trump administration because we're finally in the halls of power. And that's not quite, neither of these comments are quite wanting a Catholic nation state,
Right.
but they seem to be getting at like this idea of if Catholics aren't in control of politics and culture, we're going to be persecuted.
Hmm. Or at least there's this sense. I think there's also a this they wouldn't put it this way. This puts it probably too negatively, but there's a more paternalistic quality to some of it, which is that um, God in Christ has revealed to us His love for the world, and the Catholic Church, as bearer of truth and grace, has this particular duty to welcome others into truth and grace, and a particular wisdom to give nations and rulers of nations, which is on the one hand, I mean, very traditional. Catholics have thought versions of that for a long, long time. Certainly, popes have thought
Yeah,
that. Uh, what I find helpful about Balthasar, his way of thinking, at least for me, is he wants to know how we do that, not just why, but how.
yeah,
The ends do justify the means. So what are the means? Because they better fit up together.
yeah, yeah. That was something that in your article you were pulling some reflections from Balthasar talking about. I don't have the quote in front of me to get it, so correct me if I'm getting the heart of this wrong. But it was that the revelation of Christ isn't just what Christ revealed, but how Christ revealed it. That
Yes.
the means were just as important, and the means in particular were dissent and humility.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. For God so loved the world that he sent his only son, not to do anything ever, but to give himself to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean that's where I struggle, and like
Yeah.
the Catholic right is also my people. um, very very much my people, not just formally, but also currently in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Same.
there's there's been more space in the past decade, but like I was formed in like the ethics of the pro-life movement
Mm-hmm.
deeply, and on the teaching that every single human being has value and can never be used as means to an end, ever.
Yep. Eternal value.
Yeah.
Yep.
Infinite value.
Infinite value. Mm-hmm.
And then I saw so many of these pro-life leaders choose such undignified means to achieve an end. And I see that in this I see this in the contemporary Catholic rite as well. Alliances with um alliances with uh, like unchrist-like power in order to achieve what's supposed to be a
Mm-hmm.
Christ-like end. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
hard for me to square that circle, even when, again, the Catholic rite is like that's where I come from.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, one of the you have to be like a particular kind of kid for this to have been true, but I was this particular kind of kid where I would constantly run up against how the Catholic Church was more generous than me and kinder than me and more thoughtful than me and able to hold in itself both the certitude of the gift of Christ and the enormous question of what to do about the modern world, how to handle modern science, etc., etc. The fall of the Roman Empire. I don't know, name your thing. And so I was always running up against the idea that to be obedient to the church, I had to be kinder. I had to be more merciful, and I had to listen more, and I had to think again. Um, yeah, the Catholic Church has made my heart wider instead of narrower, which might be a comment on young me, but you know. Um, and I think that's sort of what can be striking to me about the Catholic rite sometimes is there's not really this openness that I think is there, or at least potentially. Because I don't think I was a particularly unique kid, a special genius with a soft heart. It's pretty normal. Um, yeah, so it's been hard to watch people I respect deeply react very fearfully to all kinds of things. Um,
That was a key observation in your article was you gave something of a psychological diagnosis to this grasping at power, and you just said it like fear is that diagnosis. At one point in the article you said, but Balthasar's work poses important questions about vulnerability, about why we resist it, about when we resist it, and about whether our resistance is always good. Fear of danger, after all, can motivate many awful deeds, especially on the part of the powerful. I found that I just I found that deeply, deeply true. Both in like a theological sense, in a historical sense, and in a psychological sense. Like, um, I was a catechist for a long time, so like the catechism was my thing. And there's a line in the catechism when it talks about original sin, and it talks about how uh, the sin of the first man and woman had a particular form,
Mm-hmm.
and the form was they doubted God's goodness and grasped in control in disobedience. And then it says every single sin has that exact same form. There's a doubting of God's goodness and providence, and then a grasping and control. And the thing that I believe moves that grasping is almost always fear. But when the church grasps, like the history of the church is just so filled with the profound harm that comes from that grasping. I think of a year or two ago, I interviewed Joseph Stewart, a professor of history,
Mm-hmm.
who writes about the Enlightenment, and um, he brought in some of the work I did on spiritual abuse, and he was talking about the French Revolution, and he's talking about how, for the century before the French Revolution, how the Catholic Church was so united to the French state, the French monarchy,
Mm-hmm.
that the state persecution was all framed in religious language and headed up by bishops and priests, and there was tremendous violent persecution of non-Catholics in France.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So why are we surprised? Not in a way that justifies the violence of the French Revolution, but why would we be surprised then if in a revolution against the state, there's also violent revolution against the church? And
Mm-hmm.
this just seems like one example out of so many um, that plays out. So I guess I'm not even sure where the land is. I guess my question is, why do we keep doing this? Like we've done this before. We know how this ends. Using unjust means to like grasp at power always fails.
Yeah. I bet it succeeds for a while, and that's kind of great. Success is so sweet. Uh, in the meantime, um, and then yeah, then of course it fails. And if it doesn't fail for, I mean, on one level, the church thinks in centuries, but Catholics don't. We're just people, so we haven't maybe learned the lesson yet. It's on us. Um, but I think what's so striking about the way Balthasar thinks about power isn't so much because he thinks we should never have it or never use it, but that his whole concern is with whether the the use of our capacity to act makes us transparent, a kind of transparency, you might say, to God. And for him, at least, that part's not possible unless the thing being transparent is genuinely risking itself, being vulnerable, because that is fundamentally how God has acted. So if I put on a bulletproof vest and then yell at you about the catechism, you might learn your catechism. um, but do you know it deeply it as just one of many instruments by which to learn that God loves you inestimably, uh, more than you know?
What I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Christians, the church, the word you used was like are transparent, like reveal Christ
Hmm.
when we lead with vulnerability.
Usually, yeah, yeah. Um, Vulnerability that cherishes the other. Yeah, and let Balthasar will say, "Letting be." Sein lassen. Sometimes, yeah, sometimes a few other words. But so if you can't do that, then not being transparent. So you can be vulnerable in a sort of fake way, for sure. That's more about manipulating.
Yeah.
But real vulnerability will let be the other person. Balthasar even says you should be willing to prefer the truth of the other person over your own.
Mm-hmm.
Spend the thing you earned, like spent hours earning, and prefer theirs. You can do that for now, and that small grace is an image of God's own patience. So,
That seems connected to some of my favorite teachings of Pope Francis, and this is scattered throughout his work. Like in his letter on Saint Joseph, he talked about the virtue of chastity, but not in a romantic context, but in a context of a parental context or context of someone with authority over another,
mhm,
as he defined it as love free from the desire to possess the other. He talked about in his apostolic journey to Canada when he apologized for the horrendous abuses that happened in the Catholic Indigenous schools there. He
mhm.
talked about how we cannot proclaim God in a way contrary to God Himself, and God never imposes Himself on us. He talks about in Evangelii Gaudium how no one is more patient and more willing to wait than God is, um, to wait for us to respond. Um, is that is that what Balthasar means by this letting be? This like,
It's one of the things for sure. Yeah, it's also kind of rejoicing in the other. He even will say like surprise, a willingness to be surprised. Um, yeah,
that's so different than an attitude of domination. It's
yes, yeah,
but it's also so different from anything that looks like an agenda.
yeah, yeah. I mean, Balthasar was a Jesuit. He called himself Ignatian to the core. He spent most of his life as a spiritual director and confessor. Um, and so I really think he's very concerned with what it means to listen well and how hard it is for people to speak to someone else about God.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was very worried about coercion, um, ruining the possibility of sharing. Yeah.
You, there was a passage in your article that talked about like this grasping at power, this coercion from this fear and anxiety being
Hmm.
kind of a denial of our own faith. Um, you wrote, Balthasar resists the clawing protest of our anxiety. He suggests that our fearful tactics deny the truth of what we believe. He asks us to let go of the things that we think keep us safe and to prefer God, who is himself vulnerable love, and who asks the same outrageous vulnerability of us. Our failure to be vulnerable toward God and our failure to be vulnerable with God toward those whom the world has made vulnerable turns the gospel, a story of divine self gift, into a rationalization. I didn't know, or maybe I heard and forgot, that Balthasar was a Jesuit, and I'm
Yeah.
currently going through the whatever the like 8-9 month layman's version of the spiritual exercises is, and this is deeply Ignatian.
Mm-hmm.
It also it connects with um, uh, love him or hate him, or love him and hate him. I listen to Larry Chapp quite a bit, uh, and he will talk about, and I think this is a really insightful point. He will talk about the atheism within the church.
Mm.
And this seems like a real type of atheism where I will profess belief in an all good and all powerful God, and then I will act as if that God does not exist, and I need to control my whole environment. Um, Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I think, yeah, I would want to make more distinctions in that, I think.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I think, I think I can genuinely believe in God while betraying him.
Hmm.
So I think to say deny, what did I say? Deny the truth of what we believe doesn't mean we don't believe it,
Hmm.
but it betrays the true thing about it, the truth of it. Um, because I give in to fear or the worry I won't be believed or, I mean, sort of whatever. Uh, yeah. So it is, it does deny Christ. It maybe, I don't know that it's atheism um, as such.
Yeah. What comes to mind, even as you say that, uh, is now that we're in Lent, Peter and Judas's denial.
Hmm.
There's no indication from either of them that they did not think Christ was the Messiah,
Hmm.
but they still betrayed him.
Yeah. I actually love Peter's response the most. Surely not I, Lord. It's not me. I'm not the problem. Oh, you are especially the problem. Mhm. Yes, exactly you. Of course.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it it also reminds me of the way God relates to his people um, in the desert, in the Exodus, of they're just repeated betrayals after the plagues and after the Red Sea and after the water from the rock and after the manna, and they're still complaining, and they're still turning to false gods, and
Yeah.
they're still turning to grasping at power.
Well, newness is hard because I don't know it yet. I mean, I love that about the Bible. Every single time anyone confronts a new situation, they freak out. And that's true. And yeah, Jesus tells us it sounds cool. I will make all things new. And then we're scared. We're rarely scared. And yeah, in the Old Testament, God's constantly saying, be still, which is not necessarily comforting. Um, but yeah.
And as a therapist, I want to meet people in that fear
Hmm.
and have that compassion. I'm also deeply concerned. Think back to a handful of months ago. The pastor there preached a homily, and it may have been the Beatitudes. It was such a beautiful, beautiful gospel. And the homily was so terrible. And it started, he started by saying, it is so difficult to be a Catholic in this country today.
Mm.
And I turned to my wife and I whispered, uh, I said, what the hell is he talking about? We have a Catholic vice president right now. Um, and
Hmm.
then I'm like, facetiously, I'm like, maybe he's talking about the Catholics in ICE detention facilities in Chicago who are actively being denied communion right now.
Mm,
Oh no, he's not talking about that. He's talking about Catholics who, um, he's talking about Catholics who are pro-life and anti-woke and how difficult it
mm.
is. Um,
Yeah, people are sometimes mad, which is uncomfortable.
and
Uh,
but
it's not
but
Francis Cabrini, but I guess it's a martyrdom.
but it's also like that presentation of the gospel that's driven by fear. It's such a profound distortion of the gospel. So, like, on one hand, I want to have compassion
Mhm,
for that because I see that fear in myself, right? Like, the precariousness of life terrifies me. And I don't want to be put to the test,
mhm,
a test that requires that level of vulnerability and integrity. Because I see myself like Peter, like, yes, I will pass that test. And then, like, I deeply empathize with that. But what just like is repulsive to me is a distortion of what's supposed to be good news because of fear.
mhm. Yeah, I mean it's all right to be. I think I have a paragraph about this in my Commonweal essay. Like the emotions are okay. It's all right to be afraid, and it's all right to be confused. It's all right to find, I don't know, the present state of America perplexing. I teach at a university. I love young people. That does not mean I understand the youth. Doesn't mean I understand them. I don't know what they do in their free time. I assume they're on TikTok. I don't know. But it's what I do with that. That's when I enter the real serious moral universe and commit not just my deeds, but my own body to how I'm feeling and what it means and how others um, encounter it. And that's, I think, where the problem arises. Yeah, I mean, I'm a Catholic theologian. I make people uncomfortable professionally all the time with basic Catholic positions, anything or anything, just anything. Um, and it's helpful to know I'm not Ignatius of Antioch. I'm not off to go die. Um, but it's always awkward. It's always difficult. And my dad's a Catholic deacon, so he and I both talk about it sometimes. And we've both learned it's really important to suggest to other people that the Catholic Church can survive their discomfort and critique, not by holding it against them, but by patiently asking a follow up question, not getting too mad, not feeling persecuted because I'm not woke enough. Um, yeah. Although the woke stuff is, there is a problem. The shorthand that we use to interpret the day to day has made interpreting Catholic positions, I think, very difficult in America right now. Because, at least in American terms, the Catholic Church is woke about a bunch of things and not woke about other things. And so if I start to confuse being a good Catholic with not being woke, I've got a problem. I've got a serious problem. So,
Yeah. Well, one point, when I had first emailed you to ask you to be on the podcast to discuss this essay, in your response, you said something like, "I'd love to reflect on vulnerability and the cross."
mm,
And the cross is a key theme in the reflections you pull from Balthasar.
yeah. Hmm.
Um, So not really a question other than how does he bring that in how does he bring the cross specifically into these reflections?
Yeah. Oh, Balthasar is very into the Paschal mystery. Yeah. For some theologians complain he's too interested in it. And he's like, yeah, for him, Jesus came to die and to rise again. Um, so he really wants to think about the cross, its relationship to Jesus' teaching, the sacrament, all that. Um, but I think there are a bunch of ways one could interpret the cross. Balthasar wants to emphasize the cross as a sort of double revelation of human beings and of God. Um, so when Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Balthasar says, that's the question of a child to the father, and it's genuinely wounded. And Balthasar wants to know why this happens, what it means, what does it mean about God. And so he's very interested in what he understands to be a like deliberate divine decision to take on the language of vulnerability, and to treat the problem of human beings from deep inside by becoming one of us. What does that say? And so Balthasar's Jesus on the cross is a very lonely Jesus. He's more and more lonely. Uh, Holy Saturday is not a comfort either. He descends beneath hell, Balthasar will say. And that way of speaking is to try and emphasize that he's going to go find the most lost soul, the most alone soul, the one who's turned their back on God and who will, in turning around, find God again. Um, and then into resurrection. Um, and so, yeah, I think Balthasar. I don't know. Even when I first ran into him, he describes this Christ who will go find the most tangled little lamb ever, the most mangled little lamb, and to pick them up and bring them home. Um, and that's a really remarkable description, I think. Um, yeah.
A handful of years ago, there was an Orthodox theologian I was listening to, and he was talking about the parable of the 99 sheep,
Hmm.
one who ran away. And I think it's in Luke's gospel, the retelling of this. There's a line in there that says that the shepherd goes after that sheep until he finds it. And he highlighted that line. What's that? Those three words have struck me since a lot, but in reflecting I've done about Holy Saturday, the ancient homily from Holy Saturday that the church gives us in the Liturgy of the Hours on
Hmm.
that day connects in its imagery this parable of the lost sheep. And in it, it gives this illusion of Adam being that lost sheep because it's about Christ encountering Adam
Hmm.
in hell. And something that strikes me, the resonance with what you just said, is what the cross is It's the like symbol, and more than that, of how far God will go to chase down the worst of us.
Mm-hmm.
And when he encounters the worst of us, the good shepherd doesn't lay into the sheep. He's not even disappointed. And when in this homily for Holy Saturday, when Christ gets to Adam,
Mm-hmm.
all he does is throw honor onto Adam.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for Balthasar, if we think about the resurrection, it's this it's this extension to the very, very end. That's why Christ is in charge of all judgment now. So there is judgment for sure, but the standard of judgment is how Christ has acted, the one who's given himself. That's the measure now. Um, yeah, which I'm thinking about because I'm working on this essay that's about Balthasar and the resurrection, and it's very striking the way the language of vulnerability is sustained beyond the cross as this sort of language of the cruciform resurrected church. The church is kind of always both. So that, yeah, I think like Balthasar loves to, he loves the encounter with Mary Magdalene in the Gospel of John, which is a bizarre encounter because, they're talking to each other. Mary doesn't know it's him. She says his name, yeah, he says her name. She says Rabboni. Yeah, and and Balthazar's particular interest is he says, "Don't touch me." Balthazar likes to quote the Vulgate on that. Noli me tangere. Don't touch me. I'm going to leave again. And that's part of Christian existence too, is this sort of relinquishing of Christ into the work of history instead of holding on to him. And so Balthasar kind of recapitulates, redoes Christ's action. Now it's in the Christian. Don't hold on to me like that's going to be the thing that guarantees my presence or your success. It's the letting go of me. Yeah. Like I think, oh man, I don't know how true this is objectively, morally. So I'll just say it more like aesthetically. I think for Balthasar, it's more profound for the Christian to visit the sick or those in jail than to guarantee the largest audience on TV that gets the hidden thing. That's where God is. That's where God is most at work. It's where Christ already is. You just gotta go find him. Um,
I mean that seems. I've been doing a lot of reflecting on the preferential option for the poor, which seems to be
mhm.
an emphasis in Pope Leo's teaching.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
and he has a line in Dilexite where he talks about um, oh man, I don't have it handy, but essentially showing this preferential option to the poor isn't only like the responsibility of the church. It's like the identity of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say that, yeah, there's something greater in visiting the sick or visiting the person in prison. And in Matthew 25, Jesus doesn't say only those innocently in prison. um,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
uh, that is greater than holding a large audience. To me, that seems nothing but true.
Mm. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's so tempting though, because having a large microphone preaching the gospel to a lot of people is important in its own way. Um, but I mean, Balthasar says repeatedly, even the smallest act of charity, like you're not sure what God will use that merit for. Maybe you won't see the results, but might produce something astonishing. Um, yeah, and so I think what does Balthasar say? The kingdom of God doesn't grow visibly in the world. It grows like perpendicular. He says, with respect to world history. So it's this growth you can't really see. The church, of course, is the sacrament of Christ's presence, but the kingdom, yeah.
So on that, I read your article back in January. Then I reread it recently in preparation for this. And one line, you have a line in here that stuck out to me because of current events. You say, when one no longer distinguishes between revelation and culture, then culture takes on an exaggerated importance. Losing hold of culture comes to mean endangering the gospel itself. And what immediately struck me with that today is a week before we're recording this conversation, our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio,
Hmm.
Catholic, gave a speech in Munich that was hailed by many Catholic leaders on the Catholic right in the United States as this like great speech talking, I heard it compared like allusions to Ratzinger and allusions to Christopher Dawson and the idea of like the importance of culture and like the foundation of culture being the cult, being the like the
Mm.
beliefs and religious practices. And I mean, I was formed in that. I studied Christopher Dawson in undergrad, and there's so much of that that I agree with. At the same time, what I heard in the speech was essentially an allusion to we must protect Western culture at all costs, even if that means not apologizing for past horrendous crimes that the advancement of Western culture has caused, and even if that means great sacrifice to human dignity now. We must protect Western culture at all costs.
Yeah, yeah, which is very weird for Catholics to say because we love penance. I don't understand the being sorry part. Just in a simple way. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry all the time.
So I would guess that Balthasar. I mean, you can't read Balthasar's mind. I would guess that he would not be particularly swayed by.
Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, one of my particular obsessions is with his attitude toward culture. Since he was a kind of Renaissance man, got his PhD in literature, as I said, um, and is just a liberal arts nerd. Just yeah, at one point, just in the middle of a book, he's just like, ah, if only we still had Sappho's poetry. He just but it's gone. We just have fragments. That's the way of time, I think, for him. He's got this interesting way of reading Western tradition that's surprisingly complex, I think, at least for the stereotype of him, because people know he's kind of a liberal arts nerd. Um, I think they see it as an excuse for triumphalism, but Balthasar himself, so he writes these two really important books. One is on Georges Bernanos, who's a French novelist and essayist. I'll say more about him in a second. And then the other is Reinhold Schneider, a German novelist and essayist, both of them Catholic, both of them from the 20th century. Um, and in Bernanos's case, it's this really talented novelist, really ardent Catholic who keeps bouncing around the wrong political circles. He starts off really interested in Action Française, which eventually the Pope condemned. It's ostensibly monarchist, but a very nationalist, anti-Semitic, Catholic French early 20th century group. There's still a version of them is still around, but Bernanos realizes they're not really interested in God, becomes very disillusioned with them, and so then he thinks Franco in Spain. That's the answer. Goes to Spain. It's like this is not right either. Goes to Latin America. Very disillusioned. Is coaxed back into France eventually on being reassured that there's a spiritual renewal going on in France. So he goes in France in like the 40s and 50s. It's like, this is not it either. And Balthasar writes a book on him. He's like, this is modern Catholicism. This is something about us we should know. This beautiful man who keeps choosing the wrong way, but out of integrity will leave. Out of this beautiful love for Christ and the church, doesn't stick around for Franco. Becomes disillusioned, isn't even enchanted by the renewal of French Catholicism in France. And then Reinhold Schneider is kind of on the other end of the political spectrum. He eventually becomes a pacifist and writes these gorgeous novels about the church in the West and its entanglements with power, and how that just absolutely never works out for the church, and particularly never works out for the saint. The saint's life is always wrecked in the wake of this relationship. And so Balthasar writes a book on Reinhold Schneider for German Catholics. Like, this is for you. This is us. And that book has a particularly interesting title, like Tragedy Under Grace. Reinhold Schneider and the Experience of the West. So there's this really capacious, complex relationship to culture going on in Balthasar just through those two books. It's much more willing. He clearly loves this tradition of literature and of Catholics writing it. But it's very clear-sighted about how just because it can be wonderful doesn't mean it's always wonderful. And even though he loves past things, he complains near the end of his life, we just restore churches. We don't build new ones. That's terrible. All the bombed out churches after World War II, we just made them like they were before, and he's really bummed by that. Um, we could have
Doesn't sound like much of a traditionalist.
yeah. Um, he thinks that's the real tradition. Like, they made new churches. What are we doing? So I think, yeah, Balthasar is often used to underwrite a kind of Western chauvinism, the glories of the West, the Christian West in particular, the survival of the Christian West as a Christian task. um, and that's not really the story he tells.
How does that connect to, you had said a little while ago about how he didn't see the kingdom of God as like visibly growing, but growing in this like parallel sense.
Hmm.
Um, I see so much risk in equating the kingdom of God with the Christian West.
Hmm.
What I'm hearing from you is that that's not at all what Balthasar would do.
No, he doesn't. I have like a partial translation of it. He's got this amazing little essay on culture. He's talking to like the fanciest people ever. This fancy Catholic art event, and he's talking about the glories of Christian art, and then he says it's really important for art to have money and stuff. But what about our apostolic freedom? Don't we surrender that when we connect ourselves to power? And there, I think there's a very particular, like, there's a very Balthazar like set of priorities. The art is great, it's wonderful, but that's not the thing we want to keep. The thing we want to keep is the word of Christ to human beings. Um, like, we will lose tragedies, we'll lose copies of, I don't know, Bach. We'll lose that, and it's our, but like, we can make new things. The thing to keep is God's word to human beings.
Yeah. Um, and I'm looking at the time, and we just like blew past an hour. Uh, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I could just like muse with you about vulnerability and power all evening. We can't do that. I had kind of like a scattershot of an outline with just like, here's some quotes that really stood out to me, and I think I went through a lot of them. But is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't ask you about?
Oh, that's a good question. Hmm. So, in the outline you sent me, you pulled the quote I used from Balthazar's essay "Tragedy and Christian Grace," where he talks about the church running away from the cross.
Yeah.
So I'd like to talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting essay.
Can I read the passage that you quote from him?
Please.
Quoting Balthasar, the church is tragic to the extent that she understands herself to be definitively redeemed and is always on the run, blindly head over heels from the cross that God intended for her, only to run with equal blindness into a cross that was not intended for her in this form, and which she now rightly draws down upon herself, a cross that is dislocated and perverse as a result of her own guilt, a cross with hooks, swastika, on which she is entangled and remains hanging, a cross that ultimately is included and drawn into the cross of Christ again through a kind of exceptional grace. This anxious flight of the church and of Christians from the cross was always, and is once again today, the flight into ideologies of world domination.
Yeah. So, it's one of my favorite essays Balthazar wrote, Tragedy in Christian Grace, or Tragedy in Christian Faith. Um, and I think what is remarkable about that passage is so God promises us promises the church the cross for Balthasar, which means being promised, yes, suffering, but always the modality of um, offering to God, of being an offering to God. And that's the thing the church is on the run from, being an offering to God. But God's grace is such that He can make even of our running away um, a moment in which to sort of still draw us in. Um, and so, on the one hand, in that paragraph, Balthasar is talking about the church making things worse for herself and for others by running away from her main job.
Yeah.
Um, and so, suffering more, suffering in a kind of worse way, because it's guilty and yeah, kind of cornered. You're cornered. But even that can be drawn into Christ's cross, like Christ's own action. Not because we were ever right to do it, not because it's fine now, like good job, but because His grace is greater.
Yeah.
Um, so
The-
there are all kinds of things the church has done that fit under that model of running away, making things worse, and of course God is still there. That doesn't make it all right. It just makes God greater.
yeah. Well, one thing that comes to mind, I'm not sure this fully connects, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the work that I do is in this space, is with people who have been abused in and by the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so much of not just the abuse itself, not just the enablement of the abuse, but also the continue, and not just the cover up, but the continued not taking responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Pope Leo just yesterday was Ash Wednesday, and he gave a phenomenal homily, and he talked about um, how rarely we see leaders and organizations repent of harm done. And I'm like, yes, Holy
Mm-hmm.
Father, how rarely do we see this? Um, a running away from,
Yeah.
and
And
and ye-
the suffering we cause those people is our cross. Christ suffers in them. They're the cross.
yes, and that's
It's like it's awful. That was not intended for them.
and yet part of the good news is that Christ descended into even that particular pain and
Mm-hmm.
that particular betrayal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A prayer that I put together in some of the workshops that I give, like a, a point of reflection is Christ experiences abuse and betrayal not only from his friends and not only from his enemies, but specifically from his religious leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Like he knows that pain personally.
Yeah. Um, you know that the Bernanos book I mentioned. Bernanos really loved Joan of Arc. Um, and Balthasar fully adopts his interpretation of Joan's death. And for Bernanos, the Holy Church killed a saint. That's the scandal. The Holy Church killed a child who was a saint. And he, instead of running away from that, he calls it the coldness of the fire, of the pyre that burned her, the fire that burned her. He runs toward it. He's like, most people run away, but he thinks Christ is there. Christ is there too, and he wants to be scandalized and also to, yeah, to see Christ in this child, this brave child. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not because she deserved it or wins out, but because God is greater. Yeah.
And somehow Christ is present there too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Holding all of that together is pretty difficult. And I think the easiest thing that Catholics do is use God's unshakable promise to us to um, hide from hide from um, the wounds to his body that we inflict.
Oh. When I go back to, again, being a catechist, like some of these really fundamental things of the acts of the penitent in the sacrament of reconciliation is honest examination, saying out loud the harm that I did,
Mm-hmm.
and making reparation. Those are really simple things. Those are not at all easy things.
No, no.
And the church runs away from that as fast as possible.
I think sometimes it seems to throw into question the truth of the church
Absolutely.
for people. Yeah. Um, you know, I'm obsessed with Balthasar. So I've watched his last interview like a million times. And they ask him, like, so you used to give these lectures. When you were very young, you were very frustrated with the way the church was, so you wanted something new. Now you still give these lectures, and people don't go as much to them. Balthasar sort of thinks about it, and he goes, "They want something else, young people, like we did." And he's like, "Okay with this." It's remarkable to me. It's like, I wonder what that is. I don't know. But that willingness to think beyond himself and his achievements um, is maybe the core willingness that makes stuff like penance possible. You know, there will be more, even if I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this has been so good. I'm going to link to your essay in Commonweal for listeners. How can people follow and find you if you want them to find you?
I chatter on Blue Sky right now. You can find popular essays of mine at Church Life Journal mostly. I've got an essay in America and then this Commonweal one. So yeah, that's how you can find me.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And thanks so much for being on the podcast and having this
Yeah, thank
conversation with
you.
me.
I appreciate it very much.
And thank you for listening to the Third Space podcast. If you like this conversation, please subscribe. Episodes will be released every other week. And please share it with a friend and give it a rating and review in your favorite podcast app so that more people can discover the show. You can sign up for my newsletter or send me a message at catholicthirdSpace.com. And while you're there, please consider becoming a paid subscriber. All of your support directly helps my family and allows me to continue working on projects like this podcast. If you want to schedule individual coaching with me or have me out to speak or consult with your community, parish, seminary, or diocese, please visit livingsolidarity.com. You can also join me at Smart Catholics, the online community for Catholics who want faithful conversations that go beyond easy answers or black and white fundamentalism. That's smartcatholics.com. Thanks for listening.